thank you guys so much for being here. Okay, so like Aaron said, I'm gonna finish out the series that we started at the beginning of July. We started this series 5 weeks ago. It's called Other People's Mail. She said my name. I'm Rob. I was told there's a couple of new folks here. So first of all, welcome. And second of all, like I said, my name is Rob. And I think you're all caught up. So that's everything you needed to know up until this moment. So we're continuing this series called Other People's Mail. And what we've been doing with this series is there is this section at the beginning of the book of Revelation, which everybody, when you think about the book of Revelation, everybody thinks about the weirdest possible stuff that is in there. And that stuff is definitely in there, and it's definitely weird. And one day, hopefully, we'll be able to really dig into what all of that is and how to talk about that without freaking out or feeling like you're having a waking nightmare. And so, but what we're doing today, or what we've been doing with the series, is acknowledging that before all of the stuff in Revelation that most people tend to think about, there are these 7 like little mini letters in Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3 written to 7 different churches in what was then known as Asia Minor, what is modern day Turkey. So you have these 7 different cities who all have a different kind of personality and a different history and a different kind of point of view. And before the letter becomes whatever the letter is, this letter written by one guy named John from a Greek island called Patmos, he's writing this letter to these 7 different churches. And he's saying, like, look, before we get into the stuff that's going to, like, really hopefully speak to everybody, what we want to acknowledge is everybody's beginning this conversation from a different perspective. And that's what we've been kind of looking at, is like, what are all these different perspectives? And we've only had time in this series to look at 5. And so the 2 that we didn't do are one, the letter to the city of Pergamum, which we actually, about a year or so ago, Ashley and I did a series called Tortured by the Gods, and we covered that in that series. And then there's one more that's just on the cutting room floor that eventually we'll get to, hopefully, is a letter to a city called Philadelphia, not the one you've heard of. It's a different Philadelphia. And so what we're doing, though, today is we're finishing the series with the last letter in Revelation 3, which is a letter to a city called Laodicea. And there's a lot of, as we've been doing with this whole series, kind of looking at what's going on in the city. I feel like this is really loud, by the way, and maybe it's just my voice. I don't know. To which every elementary school teacher I ever had was like, "We've been telling you this for a long time. Your voice is very loud." So we're looking at the city of Laodicea, and like we've looked at for this whole series, is each of these cities has their own kind of deal going on. They have all their own stuff. They have all their own kind of context and questions and issues that they're trying to deal with. And this writer, John, is getting into what is going on, what was happening before the letter arrived. And so a couple of things we need to understand about Laodicea. And so probably the most important thing to understand about it, or one of 2 of the most important things to understand about it, is Laodicea is incredibly wealthy. This is maybe the wealthiest city in Asia Minor at this time. And there are 3 reasons why Laodicea is wealthy. So first of all, Laodicea was the banking center of this part of the world. So there's lots of banking and gold in this city. And to this region in ancient Turkey, this was the banking center. This is like the Wall Street of Asia Minor. So if you needed like money, or if you needed to interact with a major financial institution, or if you needed to exchange currency in some sort of way, it was very likely that you were going to have to do business with somebody who came from Laodicea, or you would have to actually go to Laodicea. So you would have to in some way engage with the economy of this particular city if you needed to make a major financial transaction or investment of some sort. So not only did they have their own financial system, they were also housing the financial systems, or the financial records and stuff, financial stuff, for lots of other, that's the original Greek, it's financial stuff. So, but they were housing it for lots of other people. Like I said, it was basically the Wall Street of ancient Turkey. So within the city of Laodicea, there's lots and lots of money and gold. So second, Laodicea is a major manufacturer and exporter of a particular kind of black wool. And the reason this is important is because, like, if you have a material that lots of other people in the known world are going to pay a lot of money for, this gives you a major advantage in the global economy. So there was a kind of sheep that was indigenous to this area in Laodicea that naturally produces a very fine, like a kind of black wool that made very nice clothes that wealthy people really wanted to own. So the city became the chief exporter of these very expensive, well-made garments made from this wool that came from these sheep. So if you were a wealthy person living in the area, or anywhere near Asia Minor at this time, and you wanted to show off how wealthy you were, or whatever status you had accumulated, you would have wanted to own something that had been made from this black wool. So in the city of Laodicea, you have the banking center, but you also have this major export that wealthy people are specifically interested in buying. And so the third thing is that Laodicea is home of a famous medical school. And one of the things that made the medical school so profitable was that they had created and developed a specific kind of powder. It was called Phrygian powder. And it was used to make a very gentle but very effective eye salve. So, which is like a weirdly specific thing to be very good at, but they've gotten really good at producing this powder that creates this eye salve. And so if you live in, like, say, a desert-like climate, you might have dry eyes a lot. And so Laodicea becomes the chief exporter of this product that lots of people in this region have a lot of use for. So in one city, you have these three major sources of income. And Laodicea has become incredibly wealthy, like unprecedentedly wealthy for this place in this time. And last week we talked about Sardis, and how in Sardis they were wealthy because, like, there was a king named Croesus who had discovered and profited from discovering lots of gold in this particular area. So Laodicea has that, but they also have all these they have the black wool, and they have the eye salve, and they have this whole financial system that is generating more and more income. So Laodicea, I don't know if I've gotten this across yet. It's very wealthy. So in one city, you have all of this wealth. So now, so that's the first thing you have to understand before we get into this letter. And it's entirely possible that if you grew up in church, you've actually heard this passage read before. And you probably heard it taught in a certain kind of way. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at that, and we're going to ask, is the way that this has always been taught helpful? And is this true to what the original writer was trying to say? So understanding all of that, we're going to look at this passage from the book of Revelation, this final letter that John writes in Revelation 3. So in Revelation 3, beginning in verse 14, it says this. It says to the angel, which, of course, for the fifth time now, I'm going to tell you, angel is the word angelos, which literally means messenger. So he's not saying, like, otherworldly being with, like, a halo and wings. He's saying to whomever it is whose job it is to communicate to the gathered masses, to the messenger of the church in Laodicea, write this. These are the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the ruler of God's creation. In other words, I'm speaking for God himself. I'm speaking for Jesus. And then in verse 15, it says, I know your deeds, that you are neither hot nor cold. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. Which, okay, first of all, you might be thinking, like, why did you tell us all that stuff about wealth? This passage seems to have nothing to do with people being wealthy. And so, second of all, maybe, again, if you grew up in certain traditions, you're like, oh yeah, I've heard this passage a lot. And it's possible that you've heard this passage explained in a very specifically, like, binary kind of way. In other words, your faith is one thing or it's the other. It is hot, which is good. Like, you're very hot means, like, strong, passionate, whatever. And then cold means not any of those things. And that tends to be how this passage gets taught a lot. Like, hot is good and cold is bad. It may surprise some of us to learn that that's actually not at all what this writer is trying to say. It's an easy way to take a metaphor that we have adopted in 20th, 21st century Western culture and assume that that's what was being said 2,000 years ago to a group of people living in ancient Turkey. That's not actually what's being said. It's to tell you the truth, it's honestly way more interesting than that. So here's what's going on. If you lived in a city as wealthy as Laodicea was, you might become accustomed to a certain way of life. And as part of that way of life, you would probably get very used to getting whatever you needed whenever you need it, right? Like, do you know many people who have so much wealth and resources that the idea that they might need something, like have an actual need and not have it met, is almost unthinkable? That's kind of what's going on in this world. So a major source of embarrassment and aggravation for the people in Laodicea was that even though they have all of this wealth, even though they have so much going on in the city, it seems like they have all the resources that they could possibly want, the one thing this city does not have is a useful supply of water, which is really something you're going to want if you are living in a time when human beings need water. You know what I mean? So you have the city. This is a map. I don't know if you can tell. with Laodicea in the middle of it. So for the people of Laodicea, so the city existed along a river, which is, I mean, at the time it was kind of unthinkable to found a city not near a major body of water. So the city had been founded by the river Lycus, but the problem was Lycus had kind of over time become weaker and weaker, and it even had dried up. During certain summertime, during specifically hot summer times like this one. And so if you lived in the city and you thought like, yeah, we used to have a pretty solid like water supply, but we don't anymore. And that's very frustrating and very scary because again, like in this particular, I mean, people need water to live. I don't know if your science teacher ever told you that, but that's a thing that everybody needs. So for the people of Laodicea, there are two options for a water source because if you have a city, you have to figure out either the city has to go away or we have to find out like how are we going to get water into our city. So there are two options for a water source and we're going to talk about both of them and try and hold back your excitement talking about two different potential water sources. So the first potential water source for the people of Laodicea was a city directly to the north called Hierapolis. So Hierapolis is straight to the north, and then in a second we'll talk about the other city. So Hierapolis is it has a pair of hot springs, and actually, if you were to visit Turkey today, you could go to this city and see the hot springs. They're still there, and the hot water, how it works, how it's kind of set up, is the hot water very naturally comes out of the earth and it comes bubbling out of the ground, and it spills over the cliffs where the water sits. In fact, today the water is channeled into specific like high-end hotels for like natural like bathing pools for certain high-end hotels like today. So they have these very natural hot springs that have been there forever, and so the water comes out of the ground like piping hot, like crazy hot. So in the first century, what they do, like not long before this letter is written, in the first century, the people of Laodicea pay Hierapolis to help them build an aqueduct that goes straight down from Hierapolis into Laodicea so that they can get the hot water channeled into the city. Because because they're looking for a good source of water. So it's about 4 miles away. So by the time the water arrives 4 miles down the aqueduct to Laodicea, the water's not hot anymore. It's traveled 4 miles through an aqueduct. And by the time the water arrives in Laodicea, it's not hot. Guess what it is? It's lukewarm. And so not just that, but because of the natural chemicals associated with like what makes the water hot when it comes out of the ground, the natural chemicals make the water undrinkable. So not only do they have this lukewarm water, they can't use it for anything other than like cleaning. So they still don't have a drinkable water supply, which leads us to the second nearby city, which is called Colossae. If you've ever read the book of Colossians in the Bible, this is where that letter was going. So Colossae has a fantastic water supply. They have really cold water because it flows down from a snow-capped mountain called Cadmus. So again, the people of Laodicea were like, well, the hot water thing didn't really work out for us, but Colossae has really good cold water. And when it gets to us, it'll be cold, it'll be drinkable, it'll be awesome. So they, again, go to Colossae. They pay whatever resources are required to build this aqueduct that goes from Colossae into Laodicea. But by the time the water reaches Laodicea, which is about 11 miles away, guess what? Because of Turkish heat, it's not cold anymore. It is lukewarm. So it's kind of like this weird geographical oddity where they have direct proximity to both hot and cold water, but they don't have access to either water source until the water becomes lukewarm. So all that to say, why does the writer in Revelation accuse the people of the church of being like lukewarm water, like the local water supply? Like this is, again, not unlike with the city of Sardis. When if you were here last week, we talked about how the writer tells the people of Sardis, you need to wake up because in the history of the city, they had been conquered by 2 sneak attacks because people weren't paying attention. So he's kind of like poking a raw nerve. He's doing it again. So he's saying like, you know that water supply that no one can use? You're kind of reminding me of that a little bit. So again, we tend to sort of think of like cold being bad and hot being good because that's how you were taught at like church camp or whatever. But here, like cold and hot are both very useful, but they're not available to this group of people that he's writing to. So that's what he said up to this point. So let's jump back into Revelation. Because the question becomes, why does the writer accuse the people of the church of being like the local water supply? So in Revelation 3, verse 16, he says, so Because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. You say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth, and do not need a thing. And we're going to pause on that. We'll finish the sentence in a second. So what is he talking when he says, you say, I am rich and I don't need a thing? Now, obviously, we've already talked about, like, the city has lots of wealth. Why does he say, you say you don't need anything? Here's where that's coming from. About 30 years before this letter is written, in the city of Philadelphia, which is the one city we haven't talked about yet, which is also addressed in Revelation, in this city, there's a massive earthquake, and it devastates a massive portion of Asia Minor. And lots of cities, the center of the earthquake is in Philadelphia, so that city is absolutely devastated. But also the surrounding cities, the nearby cities, suffer lots of trauma and lots of devastation as well. So one thing that all of these cities have in common is they are all occupied by the Roman Empire. And one advantage to being occupied by Rome, if one could say that there's an advantage, is when there is a natural disaster, Rome's going to help you rebuild your city because it is to their advantage that it is rebuilt. And so all of this devastation has happened, but thankfully, the Roman Empire has a vested interest in seeing these cities not get destroyed. So Rome is pouring resources into all of these cities that have had any amount of earthquake damage. So Rome begins to send money to these different cities after the earthquake. And the only city in all of Asia Minor that says, no, thank you, we don't need any money from Rome, which I can't imagine a government entity being like, we don't need any more money, we're fine. You know what I mean? But that's what they do. So they tell Rome, like, we're good. You don't need to send us any money. So there was a certain amount of, why? Because Laodicea has lots of money, and there's a pride to being able to say, we don't need Rome's help. We will rebuild on our own. There's a certain amount of pride in being able to take care of yourself. And so to accept help from your conqueror or from anybody would have been, in the minds of some, to acknowledge some amount of weakness or lack of strength. And so you have this group of people who have suffered because of this earthquake. And when Rome comes to say, like, hey, we will help you out, we will bail you out and help you rebuild whatever's been damaged, they say, we don't need anything. So let's read this again. So in Revelation 3:16, it says, so because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. You say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth and do not need a thing. So that is that is something, he's calling back to something from very recent history. And he says, but you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. This is harsh. So now what's interesting, if you've been following us through this series, you might remember in one of the earlier letters to a group of people in a city called Smyrna, the same writer, he tells the people that feel poor, because in Smyrna, the people are poor. Like, they don't have a lot of resources. And we talked about all the reasons why a few weeks ago. So this writer, John, tells the people in Smyrna, he says, I know you feel poor, but you actually are rich. And the question, like, why was John saying, I know you think you're poor, but you're rich? Because in spite of what poverty they were feeling, they still were using what they had to help people and to bring life and goodness into the world. They were still taking whatever it was, whatever energies and resources that they had, and pouring it into the world around them to make things better. So John tells the people in Smyrna, I know you feel poor, but actually look at what you're doing. You're actually a lot richer than you think you are. You have more than than you think you do. You think you're poor, but you're rich. And now in this letter to the people in Laodicea, he says exactly the opposite thing. He says, I know you think you're rich, but you're actually poor and blind and naked. So apparently it's possible to be poor and somehow still be rich, but it's also possible to be very rich and still somehow be poor. Again, like we talked about a few weeks ago, the ideas of rich and poor in the world of the New Testament writers doesn't seem to look the way we tend to assume it looks to us. So apparently it is possible to be rich and not be, or to feel rich and to be poor, but also to be poor and to be rich. So in the world of the scriptures, poor and rich are not about what you have. Poor and rich are about what you do with what you have. So apparently Jesus' economy is quite different than the one that we've gotten used to ourselves, but also thousands of years ago. This is still a juxtaposition that people are wrestling with. So to be rich in Jesus' economy is to use what you have to bring some amount of joy and peace and grace and goodness into the world. It's to make the world a better place with whatever it is that you already have. And so most of the other cities and the churches that are addressed in Revelation have suffered intensely. And we've talked about all the different reasons why, either because of Roman persecution or because of the earthquake or because of poverty or because of like being kind of ousted from the economic system of their whatever context they find themselves in. All kinds of ways that people have really struggled. They've suffered from severe poverty. They've undergone religious persecution. They've gone through lots and lots of different stuff. And then you have this whole city, Laodicea, including the people of this church, who are actually they're fine. And they're perfectly wealthy and comfortable in the midst of all of their neighbors in these 6 other cities really struggling and really suffering in all these different ways. So you have this one city, Laodicea, and oddly, they've kind of been spared from all of the harsh realities that their neighbors have suffered. So understanding all of that, let's keep going. Look at Revelation 3, just the very next verse, in verse 18. He writes, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire so you can become rich, and white clothes to wear so you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve for your eyes so you can see. And remember earlier when he says, you think you're rich, but you're actually, he says, you say I am rich, but you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. So here he says, so here's what you need to do. You need to buy gold and white clothes and salve to put on your eyes. Now, this is interesting because he's talking about buying these three things, not from John, the writer. He's talking about buying these 3 things from God. So obviously, we're dealing in metaphor here for a minute. So he's speaking in terms that they're going to understand. Because why? Because he's saying to this group of people, like you seem to only be able to understand things in dollars and cents, or the first century equivalent of that. So let me break it down in a way that you understand. What you are missing, because you are poor, blind, and naked, you are missing gold, white clothes, and salve for your eyes. What are the 3 things that have made this city wealthy? Can we take another look at this? The 3 things that have made this city wealthy are banking in gold, wool, and eye salve. So why here does this writer say you're going to need a lot more of what you think you already have? So let's take another look at look again at Revelation 3:18. He says, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in fire so you can become rich, white clothes to wear so you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve to put on your eyes so you can see. So this is interesting. Like he is really hitting them exactly where they live. He's saying the things that have made you rich have actually made you poor. Your wealth has separated you from the world around you. So, I mean, imagine you live in one of the other 6 cities that John is writing to, and you have been devastated by an earthquake. Your home is destroyed, wherever you would go to earn a living, that's gone. Like there's been all sorts of overtaxation because of the occupation of the Roman Empire. You don't have the resources that the people in Laodicea have to survive. Laodicea is fine while you are just struggling to survive. You are barely making it. And you learn that one of these other cities and one of these other churches quite near you, they're thriving. They're doing great. And not only that, in the aftermath of that earthquake that destroyed your home, not only did Laodicea refuse to receive any help and say like, no, we're fine, we have plenty. They also did nothing to help anybody else rebuild. So the writer is saying, by using like this language of gold and clothes and eye salve, what the writer is saying is your status and your resources and your wealth and your ability to be self-sufficient have actually led you to being completely unconcerned with what everybody else is going through. You have placed yourself basically in an ivory tower or on an island all to yourself. And the mentality that you've adopted is, hey, I have everything I need. Everybody else should just take care of themselves like we are. So why? So let's go back to the lukewarm water question. Because I feel like, I'm sure there's a feeling of like, it feels like we're all over the map. Like we drew a map about like water aqueducts, and we talked about different like economic sources. Like where do all these things connect here? So why does he use the language about being lukewarm water? Why does he say, hey, you know that water supply that you hate and that embarrasses you and frustrates you? That's you. So why does he use this language? Because both hot water and cold water are useful. Are you with me? Hot water is good for all kinds of reasons. It's good for sterilization. It's good for bathing. It's good for, there's a medical school right there in the city. Do you think maybe they could use some hot water for all kinds of different reasons? So hot water has lots of uses. Cold water, obviously, is good for drinking and keeping you hydrated and alive. So hot water and cold water have value. They are useful. People can receive those things and their lives can be better because they have. Lukewarm water is useless. You can't do anything. There is no refrigeration at this time. There is no way to change the temperature of the water once it has gotten to you. I mean, you can make it hotter with fire, I guess, but that's not going to help you with the cold water. And so he's saying, you, the people of Laodicea, you have disengaged from the story. You've completely removed yourself from everything that God is doing in the world. You're not really in the game at all. You basically said to yourselves, like, look, we're fine. So as long as everybody else can just take care of themselves like we can, everybody should be fine. So why send this letter to 7 different churches? Why not just write like specific letters to the specific churches? Why does John take the time? Like, why not? I mean, I realize like you can't like photocopy at this time, but like, why not basically write a version of this and send one to Laodicea, one to Sardis, one to Philadelphia, et cetera, et cetera? Why send one letter to 7 different churches? Paul wrote one letter per city. Why can't John do it? Why does John have to lump all of these churches together? Because clearly they're all going through very different things. So why connect the dots? Why connect all these churches with this one letter? Because John wants them to feel like you're all in this together. I realize your circumstances are not all the same, and I realize we've all like come to this conversation from a different point of view. But here's the thing: we're all in this together. We are all part of the same story, or we're supposed to be, at least. So when one group of people says, "Hey, we're good. We don't need to receive any help. We don't feel the need to offer help to anybody else. We are fine, and you should just be fine like us." Like, how hard is that? What are they doing? They are excusing themselves from their own responsibility to care about the well-being of other people. They're saying, your problems are not my problems. And so lukewarm is not about like feeling like really passionate about your faith. That's absolutely not what John is writing about at all. That is a complete misinterpretation of this passage. Lukewarm is about disengagement. Lukewarm is about, honestly, it's about selfishness. It's about saying, like, hey, we're fine, and you should be fine too. If you were like us, you'd be fine too. And it's about a total disinterest in the well-being of others as long as I'm okay. So John uses this one image that everyone receiving this letter will absolutely understand, and actually it will totally get under their skin, probably, as it relates to something that is completely without purpose: lukewarm water. And he's saying, you know that water that you can't use for anything, that has no purpose and no value to anybody? That's you. And by the way, what John is not saying, he's not saying wealth and comfort, these are bad things. He's absolutely not saying that. He writes to, like, he addresses other cities and other letters where he doesn't, like, take it this far, cities that have wealth. He's not saying wealth is bad in general, or having resources is bad. That's not at all what John is up to. What he's saying is, it is possible to have wealth, to be wealthy, and to still absolutely miss the bigger story. It is possible to have all the resources you need and to completely not know what to do with it. It is possible to have everything you need and to still completely be disengaged from what God is doing in the world. It's possible to be rich, but to actually be poor, is what John is saying. I remember when I was a pastor in Texas, we had the church that I was pastoring had recently moved into a new location, and it was in a little town. Just I don't know if you've ever been to the Texas Motor Speedway. We were a couple of miles west of the Texas Motor Speedway in a little town called Roanoke, and so we had moved into this storefront property in Roanoke, and about 3 or 4 months after we moved in, there was this big event in the community where there was a mobile home living, like a trailer park basically, that was just north of where our church was, that people had been living there for 40, 50 years. And word had kind of gotten out that there was a major corporate developer that had bought up all that property, and that the landlord was basically giving everybody who lived there like X amount of months to basically just get out of there. And so there were like dozens and dozens of people who were like, we have almost no time to get ourselves ready. We're about to have nowhere to go. And a lot of these trailers, because they'd been there for so long, mobile homes, a lot of these homes that had been there for so long, like you couldn't just like up and move them because they'd been there so long, and some of these things, some of them were in really bad shape. And so what we as a church decided to do was we had a work day where basically we sent somebody in a couple of weeks beforehand and said, hey, go door to door and just find out who needs repairs so that they can, so that moving won't just destroy their home. And so we ended up spending a couple of Saturdays just going up there and doing whatever like small repairs we were able to do to help people more able to move, which I mean, I feel like is what the church is supposed to do. But I remember there were all these online forums in the town, and there was one where somebody was saying like, my mother lives in Roanoke. We live 2 hours away. It's too far for her to move her mobile home to us, and I'm really upset. Like, I don't know where she's gonna go. And I remember somebody commenting on that thread, somebody who lived in Roanoke, in one of the neighborhoods nearby, and they commented on, I cannot believe a person said this. Like, I can't believe a person had this thought, but more so, I can't believe a person thought, like, I'm gonna say this, and everybody's gonna not like hate me for saying this. So so this guy comments, and he says, hey, I don't know about anybody else. I'm just gonna say it. I'm just excited my property value is gonna go up. And like, that, and there were obviously a couple of people who just like jumped down their throat, and rightly so. But there were a couple of people who like liked the comment, who also lived in the area. And I remember reading that and thinking like, oh yeah, this is like lukewarm water. You know what I mean? Because it's this notion of like, oh, there are lots of people. A lot of them are elderly. A lot of them are physically infirmed. And they do not have the resources to just up and move whenever you need them to, or whenever they're told to. But so you have this community of people who are about to basically just be like ejected with no concern for where they're gonna go next. And you have somebody else who is voicing the thought of, hey, my property's going up. My property value is gonna go up. So this is great for me. That's lukewarm water. Lukewarm water is the thing that has given me the ability to have resources and to be comfortable, has actually separated me from any concern that other people might have, any needs, any desperation that might be felt around me. To be connected to the story that God is telling is to be deeply concerned about the well-being of others. These are irreversibly connected. And anytime we become really self-righteous about our own situation, but really uninterested in the pain and the struggle and the fear and the hurt of other people, then we have become like lukewarm water. This is what we, by the way, this is what we mean. I realize this can be a sensitive topic, and I look forward to your emails. But this is, I'm just kidding. I don't have a church email address. But this is what we mean when we talk about the word privilege, right? Because what we're talking about is I have a certain amount of resources, position, connection, and there are other people who don't, but that's not really my problem. For example, let's talk about gender equality for a moment, shall we? And I mean, I feel like this is a safe space to have that conversation because there are women here in leadership. We have Ashley is on our teaching team. This is a church that has always sort of been in the lead of the conversation about gender equality in churches. However, even with that, I know lots of men in the world and in churches who will tell you gender equality is in your imagination. It doesn't exist. I know a woman who pastors a church in Southern California, and once a year on the anniversary of this is a way to bully people, but all in like a Bible nerd way. On the anniversary of when Martin Luther like nailed the 95 Thesis to the wall of the church in Wittenberg, Germany, and you're like, oh, of course that. So when the Protestant Reformation began, Martin Luther like nails a decree on the door of a church. So every year on the anniversary of that, there's somebody in this town that my friend pastors who puts something on the door of their church, basically talking about how women shouldn't be in leadership. It happens every year, and so. Yeah, and so she basically she'll post about it every year, like, yeah, he's back. So, because it's a he, obviously, but we live in a world where you'll have lots of men who will say like you're overstating it. There is no gender inequality. You're over exaggerating a thing that's not really a big problem. Why does a person say that? Well, because it's never happened to them. And so the very thing that gives me a certain amount of privilege in the world, where I don't have to like live every day thinking about this dynamic, that thing is the same thing that makes me unaware of when it happens to other people, because it doesn't work the same for everybody, does it? So the thing that makes me like metaphorically rich becomes the thing that makes me poor. It becomes the thing that disengages me from the struggles of other people. To be rich in Jesus' economy is to be fully aware and engaged with the struggles and the disadvantages and the pains and the hurt of other people. Another conversation that we could be having on this subject is the conversation surrounding race. If someone says, we still have a lot of healing and reconciliation to be done around the subject of racial inequality in the United States, then someone, very likely a white person, will say, like, no, we solved that already. Didn't you hear? Like, racism was like a couple generations ago. It's over. Why would somebody say that? Oh, because that's never happened to them before. It's possible. It is possible to not understand the struggle of somebody else because it's never happened to you. And because it's never happened to you, it doesn't seem very real. And so it is possible for our economic or social advantages to make us unaware of the struggles and the pains of other people. It is also possible for us to take what we have and to leverage it to make people's lives better. It is possible that we can take the resources, the privilege, if you will, the access, the whatever, the advantages that we've been given, and to say, what can I do to lift somebody else up who actually is being harmed by this particular situation or this particular system? What do I have this goes back to the Smyrna conversation. What do I have right now that I can use to make somebody else's life better? So John says some pretty harsh things where he says, you're naked, poor, and blind. But then look what he says right after that in verse 19. He says, those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline. In other words, I'm saying this because I care about what happens to you. Bless you. So he says, those whom I love, I rebuke, I discipline. I tell you this stuff because I think we can do better. And I care about this. So be earnest and repent. So what does he say? He says, this whole thing isn't coming from a place of anger or judgment. I'm not telling you this because I'm giving up on you. He says, it's coming from a place of love. I want you to be who God created you to be because that gives everybody else an advantage. That helps all of us for us to engage in this in an honest, good faith kind of way. So the writer uses this word repent. And in the Hebrew mind, the word repent is the word, originally it means teshuva. The Hebrew word is teshuva. It literally means return. And he's saying, return to your original God-created identity. This is to become the best version of yourself. Before all of the things, all of the barriers got between me and the people who needed my help. So then in verse 20, it says, here I am. This is Jesus speaking. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with I will come in and eat with that person and they with me. This is fascinating. So the whole structure of this letter looks like this. If you were just going to break down and draw an outline or like a mind map of how this letter works. He says, you, people of Laodicea, have been so self-absorbed and closed off to the needs of other people that you have become like lukewarm water. You become useless to what God is doing in the world. You are not participating in the story at all. I am so frustrated by you. You need to rethink what you view as valuable in this life now. And with that said, please know that I love you. So let's share a meal together. Like, this is interesting. The whole thing ends on a meal. Why? Because a meal is an intimate thing. A meal is relational at its core. Because it's one thing to sit in a gathered space and listen to one person talk for a little while, which is a lot of fun for the person talking, maybe not for everybody else. It's one thing to do that, but there's not a lot of like back and forth like connection going on, or it's limited. A meal is like the ground is level when you share a meal with somebody. A meal is an intimate thing. It's hours of time sometimes spent together. It's a sacred gathering in which you acknowledge that you and the other people gathered around the table with you have each received something beautiful and life-giving. And no matter who you are or what you've done or how you view yourself, the good news of this letter is that God says to you, I love you, and I want you to be at the table. I want you to be a part of this story with the rest of you. We're all in this together. Let's all gather together at the table. So may you be fully aware of all of the ways that you can offer grace and comfort and generosity to others. May you remember that you are loved and that you have the power to bring more grace and peace into the world, that you don't have to live like lukewarm water. You can actually say, like, there are some things that I have that are incredibly useful and incredibly valuable, even if it's just my time, even if it's just a little bit of attention towards something, even if it's just a little bit of concern for somebody who just doesn't have some of the advantages that I've always had. Even if it's just that, you have something that can be valuable, and you don't have to live your life like lukewarm water. So we gather together at this table and we say, let's acknowledge that we have certain things that we can share with one another. And that's the beauty of gathering around a table.